Yeah, we've shared it with some of our friends and fellow creatives, and in that process, we've heard some feedback, and a couple of them were like, "Well, I enjoy the topic and what you guys are doing, but I don't know who you are," or at least we don't know the other person's mutual friends. So they're like, "It might be nice to know who we're dealing with and getting involved with." So
Welcome to the Creative Navigators.
We are two unlikely friends exploring resistance by examining the intersection of the creative process, productivity culture, and artistic expression.
Hi, welcome to the Creative Navigators. I'm your co-host Obed.
and I'm your co-host Jordan.
And today we are doing something a little bit different. We're having our episode 0. We realized that we want to give like a proper introduction to ourselves and a more direct kind of well, I don't want to say explanation, but kind
Introduction
of
to who we are.
justification.
Yeah.
Yeah, an introduction to sort of ourselves and the idea of the podcast and kind of like what maybe like led into what the concept behind it. Does that seem like the right kind of concept for today's episode?
Yeah, we've shared it with some of our friends and fellow creatives, and in that process, we've heard some feedback, and a couple of them were like, "Well, I enjoy the topic and what you guys are doing, but I don't know who you are," or at least we don't know the other person's mutual friends. So they're like, it might be nice to know who we're dealing with and getting involved with. So we had a Godoy moment of, wait a second, you and I know each other, but the listeners might not know who we are.
Yeah, and I think we kind of started with like, let's just jump into it and then we'll figure it out later. And
Yeah.
this is us figuring it out later.
Yeah.
So
Also, a little bit of behind the scenes magic. We've been workshopping this idea for like coming up on 4 years now, and maybe I think 2021. So yeah, coming up on 4 years. And so I'm sure at some point we had recorded a who we are, what we're doing type of a thing. So in the back of our minds, we were probably thinking we'd already done it, but let's go for it. Let's do it again.
all right, so where do you want to start? How far back? So it was fall 1982, and
Instead of telling you each other our live stories, we could maybe focus on like how creativity has always been a part of our lives.
creativity has always been a really big part of my life. I well, according to my mom, I started drawing when I was like 2 years old, and she knew I was going to be a really good artist. Or oh, that sounds like I'm bragging, but
Everybody's mom
she,
thinks they're going to be a great artist.
well, she was just very astonished when she noticed that there's something, because she was like, "Oh, you were like 2 years old and you drew like a perfect circle," and I was like, "Oh, that's funny." Yeah. So, and then really, art has always been like a big part of my life. I've always been interested in animation from a very young age. I loved cartoons. I loved video games, all that stuff. And I took a lot of art classes. Um, I was constantly drawing. I went to art school, studied animation. I didn't end up getting into animation industry, and life circumstances, life happens, and it kind of it takes you away from whatever passion or uh, motivation or desire that you have for creating art or pursuing art in your even in your personal life, not just in a professional way. But but that was always something that was very important to me, and part of, I think, what this project is helping to kind of rediscover that for ourselves, and also to share that with others who also want to um, either rediscover it or continue to discover it over and over in their life, in their everyday life, professional life, political life, you know. Um,
Would you say that there was like a major life event that happened that kind of knocked you out of your creative process, or did it just kind of dwindle over time? Adulthood kicks in, that sort of thing.
I mean, going to college was kind of like a big um, thing that really changed the way that I looked at it and how I felt about it. Um, it introduced a lot of like pressure
Mm,
that I didn't really have before. And, you know, once you're in college, you're officially an adult. And so, you know, it, I'm sure everyone experiences this in different ways to varying degrees, but you kind of become more responsible for yourself. And that's when kind of like the adult um, concerns start to become a part of your life. And um, it, stuff like creative pursuits start to feel like they become less important or less of a priority, especially if they're not directly related to earning
earning
income
a
or
living,
taking care
yeah.
of yourself, you know. So um and it just became more and more discouraging for me that I think art started becoming almost traumatic in a way, I would say, even. And I'm still working through that because I used to find a lot of joy in art, and a lot of joy in imagining things. And um, it became, I think, twofold. One, because I didn't really finish college and I didn't get into the industry following that, that it became a disappointment in that regard. And then trying to just pursue art, even just for personal pleasure, becomes a reminder of that and becomes almost like painful, like kind of almost like associated with that. And so you kind of like leave it by the wayside, and you try to pursue more quote unquote practical avenues for how you're going to live your life. And I mean, eventually that did lead me to getting into nonprofit, and I think that was also a formative experience, and in a weird way eventually leads me into kind of full circle, right? Like leading back into, hey, actually rediscovering art would be important. And all of the evolution of my political self and how I imagine the world to be, should be, starts to kind of include more creativity as a really vital component. So um, I feel like that kind of sums up where I'm at now at the point of this. Mm-hmm.
It's pretty major. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
you'd shared that before, like that trauma of feeling a failure almost by not
Yeah.
finishing art school, and like you probably had a clear vision for where you would have liked to wind
Mm-hmm.
up, and then you did get there in a long roundabout way, but still not. Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually a really big thing for me in that I always, up until when I went to college, I always thought I knew exactly what I was going to do, what I wanted to do. And then you start going to college, and then like the realities start to
Right.
kind of hit you in the face, you know.
Right.
Um, the industry itself is not like what you imagine it to be. Uh, although that really wasn't the disappointment. The disappointment was more just so many things going on, and obviously, like, I don't know how much we want to get into it. We also have a very similar background as far as growing up Jehovah's
Religious
Witness and
upbringing.
all
Yeah.
that, which is kind of
Hmm.
like what initially brought us together in the first place. But that was a factor as well, because that kind of pulls you in different directions. And it, in many ways, it pulls you away from pursuing this kind of thing. So maybe that also is an important part of the story as well, um, to a certain degree.
For me, much like all of my background with being creative as a child, as a teenager, getting out of it for a number of years. For me, it's very much involved in that part of the story. So it's actually there's also an interesting discussion there of like people who go all in on that kind of religious background, as well as like you were pretty involved up until a certain point too, and that entire spectrum of how oppressive environments can really stifle creative desire and passion and pursuit.
hmm hmm And yeah, definitely like just so much is, I feel like another part of it too is that so much, like I said, I thought I had it figured out for most of my life. And then it started, there was kind of like an existential crisis of like, oh, wait a minute. And I think it being so tied up with my identity for so long kind of, um, when all that stuff, when this whole thing of, how I felt about when I was in college, and then also things personal life, and also things with Joe's Witnesses, and like everything kind of like hit the fan all at the same time, really. Um, I think it just really associated. Ooh, yeah, I think it really was a lot with the failure and I wasn't able to do this, and every time I draw, it's like a reminder, or if I attempt to, it feels linked to that, and yeah, I would describe it with trauma. I think, and that's something I'm still like figuring out and talking about in therapy, but
I had
um,
never thought about it that way
yeah,
before. I think you just
no,
unlocked something for myself.
oh,
Would it be too much to go into like how you're trying to like not challenge is the right word, how you're trying to like reclaim that creative outlet?
um, yeah, it's just, I mean, really, the only way to do it is just to do it. Um, uh, I think, what is it? What is it called? Like the exposure therapy? Is that
Mm.
when you have? I mean, a lot of times that's really the only way through is to like push yourself through it. I don't know if that's exactly how that stuff works, but um, there really is kind of no other way in a way, I think, because it's like, I mean, if your anxiety is around something that you have to do and it's something that you want to do, but there's that barrier, it's like you kind of have to learn how to separate that in a way, like, because you're trying to unlearn that association, right?
Hmm.
And so the only way to really do it is to like do it. You have to try to draw. So I've just been trying to figure out all these different ways of like how can I produce art? How can I um associate it with different things? And a lot of times it really is just like, okay, I have to force myself to, we're gonna practice today. We're gonna doodle. We're gonna count that as a success. If I doodle a freaking circle or a line on a piece of paper, that is a success. That is something. Getting involved with other artists, that's a really big one. That's one that has been helping me a lot. Um, and I think trying to create like I that whole thing of that I was able to create a piece and submit it for a show, and I got in and everything. That was a great um, challenge that I really pushed myself to do, and stuff like that just really helps. I mean, and I think it's really important to just count any kind of any little push toward it is a should be counted as a success. In the most simplest way, I know we have kind of like a way that we want to think about what is success and do we even need it as a concept, especially when it comes to creating art. Um, And I think maybe even going back to the whole trauma thing, like I think this goes even to our kind of like central idea of what the podcast is and how like central a critique of capitalism is inherent in it. Because I think this kind of capitalist idea of like success, failure, value is so ingrained in our minds that it affects. I feel like that was a mindset that I had when I was in school, and I was judging my own ability and my own relationship to art based on that viewpoint. And I think that created a trauma around creating art. And I'm in the process of unlearning all that. But I think that is like a major factor in my whole concept of like success, failure, really affected my ability to engage with creativity, with art. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I think we keep sticking like we're gonna pin that whole thing about what does success in art mean. We need to dedicate one, if not multiple, discussions to it.
Oh, yeah.
And I understand that for myself. I kind of have a similar, very parallel story to yours, where when I was a kid, writing is my vice. That's what I love to do. I love to write. I will just come up with stories on the fly, and I can put down 20 pages like it's nothing, or I used to be able to. And in my teenage years, then I got into game design, game making, like RPG Maker, kind of naturally or accidentally found this really cool program that you could kind of solo develop a kind of classic 16-bit RPG, like from the Super Nintendo era. And I got really into that and developing a story that could be transmitted through that medium. And something you and I both share is we've been really big gamers for a large portion of our lives. Video games is something I love to play even to this day. And then we kind of briefly touched upon our background being with Jehovah's Witnesses. When I was 17, so 16, 17, went through a pretty traumatic experience with the family. And the elders of the congregation I was attending at the time kind of took that as a moment to be like, "Hey, Jordan, you should really you should forego kind of your personal desires and pursuits and be a full-time Jehovah's Witness instead." And for them, that means, preaching 70 hours a month or going to Bethel, which I ended up doing those things. And so I kind of learned this whole, and I started working, I started doing that, and I kind of learned, like you're saying, about how capitalism can kill creativity, where if it didn't feel like I was actively like being productive, it felt like it was something that I shouldn't be spending my time on. And so I'm never going to be a professional writer, video game designer, artist. That's musician even. That's always going to be passions of mine. I'm never going to make a living at doing those things. And so I just kind of stopped doing it entirely the entire time I was for about 10 years that I was like fully pursuing the Jehovah's Witness activities. And it's only been, and then I left that environment. I immediately went into college and then grad school. And the plan at the time was becoming a mental health counselor who focused in helping people from those environments. And it was kind of like my own self-therapy, plus I actually went to traditional therapy and then some other things that helped me kind of process all of that. Finally being like, oh, what I have always wanted to do is be a creative person. It's always been there. Telling stories has always been what's driven me. The medium might change. It's been writing. I've gotten into podcasting, of course. I've done video editing in the past. I've teaching myself how to make games. But telling stories is that's what I've always wanted to do. And it's really only even been in the last year. You and I have been workshopping this idea for this creative podcast for 4 years, but it's really only even been in this last year that I've finally been in a place in my life where I could pursue it, because I have a job that pays pretty well, and it actually leaves me
Yeah.
evenings and weekends and emotional energy and creative energy where I've never had that since I was a teenager. Um, and that's what's finally opened up the door to exploring those passions again.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I, I mean, as you were talking, I was just thinking, like, wow, that idea of if you're not doing something like productive, then it's not worth doing. That is such a like deeply ingrained thought that I think a lot of people have. Um, and I see that as like a really capitalist idea that, it serves that, for us to look at ourselves as workers and to look at the our labor as being only to kind of exalt the idea of productivity and then to have this narrow concept of it, and it's all tied to producing like value.
Mm-hmm.
You start to
Shareholder
see
value,
how
yeah.
it's like, oh, okay, this is ultimately, there's a way that idea is sold to us as value for us, but really behind it is it's to create good workers that can continue to create value for
Right.
the capital class.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting how like even in like the Jehovah's Witness world, that is
Mm-hmm.
such a central idea.
Right.
It's
Um,
slightly tweaked, but
yeah. Yeah, there I mean there's multiple conversations there I'm sure we could have. For you, what you were just mentioning is like college and the realities of adult life kind of coming down on you. Was your kind of introduction into that? Did you have like growing up, it sounds like your mom was really supportive of your artistic pursuits. Did you have like a really good support system, friends at school, parents, other people who kind of mentored you and wanted to cultivate those creative outlets?
I would say yes. I did. I had I think it was recognized at a very early age that I did have talent. I had something that was there that people thought should be nurtured. I think I had supportive um, parents around that. At least as far as like, hey, yeah, you're good at this. You should continue to do it. I think even as far as like a career, I think that was, I don't know how much I want to say it was encouraged. Um, I think it was allowed.
I was just gonna say
um,
aloud, yeah.
uh, because, and the reason I say that is because I think in general there is an idea of pursuing art as a career as being kind of shaky. Um, and I think that was always there. And I think it was like, well, if you can make it work, okay, but you really should try to
Right. Yeah.
have
A real
something
job.
more
Yeah.
stable. Yeah.
Mm,
But I think my mom was always very supportive. You know, I think she was very supportive. I feel like there was a limit to, because this, it wasn't something that she knew a whole lot about. It wasn't like something that she grew up um and I think a lot of parents, they just, it's not an industry that they have familiarity with.
right.
It's not something that they really know a lot about, but
Right.
they're like, well, I support that you care about this,
Right.
and I will support your development in it.
Uh,
So I definitely had that. Of course, I had, friends. Everybody kind of recognized all through school. Everybody recognized that I had like some kind of talent. And yeah, I would say even classmates, teachers for sure were very encouraging. I remember I had my seventh grade geography teacher, Mr. Rivera, was he was a comic book nerd, and so I drew a lot of comic book characters at that time, and he was really encouraging, and I think that was a big, huge impact that this teacher was so like cool about it and really encouraged. me to, pursue it and draw and everything. And then when I got in high school, I had a lot of art teachers that were, really wanted to nurture me as an artist, and it kind of helped me get to that next level as, okay, kid who really likes to draw, to, oh, art is, you could be an artist, you can do these things. And I feel like it felt like an upward trajectory until I got to college. And then a confluence of factors kind of helped create, how that ended up turning out. And what about you? Like, how, I mean, yeah, I guess you kind of talked a bit about how it kind of was, your creative energies were redirected, let's say.
Yeah, redirected. Um, yeah. Though also, I don't want to overlook too what you were saying. It's cool. Like you had that one teacher, and maybe even to this day, his uh, nurturing of that, recognition of that is still kind of carrying you. Like I abandoned this pursuit for a little bit, but because I know you've mentioned that you want to like a comic, like draw comics is kind of what you really want to
Hmm.
do.
Hmm.
I guess the question might be like, in terms of number of people who've like encouraged you over the years, has it been a very small number of people who are like the difference between, oh yeah, drawing is fun and cool and whatnot, versus like, hey, you could actually really do this thing.
Um, I think it was always assumed that I would pursue
Mm-hmm.
as, like, in a professional way. I actually think it was the opposite. I think there were very few people. I think maybe there were certain family members that were skeptical about art as a career, art as like a viable
Means to support yourself,
pursuit.
or
Yeah,
making a living off of your art.
yeah, and I think there was a skepticism about
Skepticism, yeah.
that, um, but not discouragement. I think it
Gotcha.
was more like, well, it's really going to be on you, and so
Mm-hmm.
I think it ended up turning into a little bit more pressure and scrutiny than it would have been if I, like, picked something a little bit more, you know, traditional, or,
Yeah.
because I was very like, this is all I want to do. I have no other, like, nothing else that I would want to pursue. And I think people thought, like, well, maybe you should have a backup or something else,
Yeah,
because
right.
I think people do think that it's, is this, like, viable? And but I think they also kind of trusted me a certain set, that I knew what I wanted, and I kind of knew about it more than maybe they did. So even with Jehovah's Witnesses, just that they knew that I was going to college, they had a skepticism around it, where they're like, well, they weren't exactly super interested or thrilled, but there wasn't hostility, or, like, that I sensed,
Right.
But
Right.
I'm pretty sure that that decision did delay a lot of my development in the religion, I think. Um, but you know how it is. It's like the whole thing of going to college, and especially something like art school. It's like, it's kind of, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
So, but that to me was not I feel like more significant influences and more significant people were rooting for me more, and in a weird way, that kind of put a lot of pressure. And I think as time went on, the more pressure got attached to it, and the more focus was put on, this has to be a viable thing. This
Mm.
has to, like,
Yeah, right.
work.
Yeah.
It became less about the joy of creating, and more like a job of, like, I have to make a living. I have to support myself. I support my family to a certain extent. There was a lot of pressure for a lot of different things, because also I'm, like, the oldest, the boy, like, so there's a lot of pressure coming from that angle. And I think that really affected my relationship too.
Yeah, I'm trying to work through this because we've talked quite a bit already about, we can see the results of our lack of doing or, not fully engaging in the artistic endeavors that we'd like to. Um, like for me, it's, I have to work and then I'm done with work for the day. Do I want to sit down and write for an hour or do I kind of want to just like zone out and not do anything? We've talked about like that kind of stuff quite a bit. I was I was really young. I was like 9 or 10 years old the first summer that my dad kind of forced me into working. He didn't like the fact that we would just sit around the house not doing anything during the summers when we were on summer break. Um, and so I worked summers with my grandpa from the time I was like 10 years old all the way, through high school and then off and on again as I had time. And then my grandpa, for sure, like the only thing my grandpa lived to do was to work. That's all he would do. If he wasn't at work, he was thinking about work. He was thinking about new business endeavors. He was putting out emails and feelers to different companies trying to grow his business. Um, and then, of course, we've, talked a little bit about Jehovah's Witnesses, and they kind of overtly tell their members that if it's not benefiting the religion, then it's not beneficial for your time to do. So yeah, I did really internalize how deeply I internalized if I'm not going to be able to make money off of this thing that I'm doing, or if it's not productive, then I shouldn't be doing it. Um,
Why don't we talk about like a little bit about why we decided to settle on this particular idea for the project? Because I know we like you mentioned we 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 started trying to do kind of this podcast project, like there were several starts, and I think when we landed on this idea, that's when it really clicked. Um, I mean, I think it really started because we just have like great conversations, and
yeah.
you are very insightful, and you're a great listener, and you're uh, got a great voice, and I think we, I think we
That
just
counselor in
enjoyed
me.
the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we just enjoyed
Um,
the conversation. Thought this would be really interesting to share with others. And then when we settled on this concept, it really clicked. But what? How about you get into a little bit about like what the why of this particular incarnation?
yeah. Well, actually, it's funny you say that. I don't think I've really fully told you specifically, my
Oh,
podcast partner. Um, so one of the things I always appreciated about you, and this is just a little bit of context for the listeners, is you and I know each other because we're both formerly Jehovah's Witnesses, and you were kind of doing your I'm not really interested in the conversations that ex Jehovah's Witnesses were having online at the time when I was fully getting into it. And so I remember that you would like I would put something on Twitter or wherever we were interacting, and you would kind of just like push back, even just like just a tiny bit of like, there might be a better way to think about this, and like you were one of the only voices that kind of got through at the time. And so you and I kind of maintained touch with each other, even as I was starting to exit that environment myself. We kind of, I think it was like mostly on Twitter where, I'd see your posts and I was like, oh, that's really cool that Obed's actually, like you do the nonprofit work and you're really supportive of the LGBTQ community. Um, and then I kind of had an experience where I completely was like, I do not want to touch this XJW thing anymore. I'm not interested. I am moving on with my life. And there was like four people that I wanted to maintain contact with after that, and you were the first one on that list. And so, anyways, like you said, you and I have always had really good discussions as long as I've known you through our XJW background through to today. And I think it was you at one point was like, you ever think about starting a podcast where we talk about, creative stuff and what's going on in our lives? And I had just come back from, I went weirdly viral on YouTube because of the ex-Jehovah's Witness thing. I didn't like that. Didn't like what happened with it, the fallout of everything. And I'm like, I liked the creative aspect of it. I like the podcast. I like the research. I didn't like the parasociality, where you as the creator become the heliocentric person behind what's going on with that project. And I think it was kind of workshopping that. What did I like? And then you had also kind of had some background with video creation and doing stuff for your job, plus in your personal life. And then that kind of morphed into, wouldn't it just be cool to like we're going to start a place where, this is kind of our hub of the creative projects we're finally wanting to get back into. And then we create community around that rather than make this thing that's like a parasocial. We are the content creators. We are the people who we want to come and watch us and listen to what we have to say. And so our current iteration of this project that I'm really excited about is like I'm getting back into game design. I can come and talk about that project with this community that we're trying to create. And it's not that like, look at me, I'm important, I'm fabulous, I'm whatever. I'm the content creator at the center of this thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that was very important that we bring in other people, other voices. That's not really just avoiding the parasocial thing, which I don't know if it's like totally unavoidable, but I think there are definitely things that help really cultivate that kind of relationship and things you can kind of avoid doing. And I think we're less interested in personality and a little bit more interested in like what the conversations are and like other people's experiences,
Yeah.
as well as our own, and kind of help working through those. Because I see it as like, oh, we're interested in creativity itself, because like we want to investigate and discover like what are the things that really drive other people to do, excavating what drove us and maybe to help rediscover it for ourselves and also with others, and to talk to people who maybe I was always interested in people at various stages, people who are trying to discover it for the first time, or who on the outside seem like, oh, hey, they're a creative. Like you could solidly say they're a creative person, and like, well, then what is their experience? Like, how do they experience this? Because I'm sure there's similarities, and there's things that are that share, and maybe it's not just, well, how do you keep yourself motivated, but also like, maybe it looks different from the outside than how it is experiencing it on the inside, and especially like how it connects to like work culture and productivity and all that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah, I really echo what you're saying. My transition out of I went through that phase where it's like, oh, I want to be a influencer, social media content creator, and all that stuff. And my transition out of that was the realization that what I love is the stories. I just love hearing people's stories, and I wanted to like give a platform to that. And I did actually. I had done a podcast where I was interviewing people just to kind of like get some some of their stories, and then editing into like a really nice format for people. And that transitioned into the realization that like trauma farming is not really, I don't like that anymore. But I still like people's stories. So it's much more positive of a thing to like focus on their creative outlets and like how they are keeping themselves going. And I think that was kind of the transition for me, at least, into this project. So I'd like to hear you too. Like, what was kind of your thought process and a little bit of background history of getting into where we're at now?
I mean, I would basically say it echoes that. It's wanting to have something that puts this at like the forefront of my mind, of really thinking about it, really just to like I said earlier, it's like it's the doing of the thing. Like you have to do it, and you have to engage with it, and I feel like this is part of that practice too, of reconnecting with it and engaging with it, and doing something, I feel like always having a project is itself, it's almost like self-sustaining, right? It's like doing it, you're getting something done, and also it is kind of refueling you in a way.
Yeah.
It's keeping I don't always want to connect creativity with production, or even maybe that term. Maybe there's like a better term, I don't know. But just to communicate the idea quickly.
Yeah.
just producing something, putting something out there in the world, sharing, because I feel like that's what art is. It's like you're sharing parts of yourself,
Yeah.
you're expressing yourself, thoughts, feelings, ideas, whatever. And I feel like doing that and sharing with people is kind of like the crux of the whole thing.
Right.
And I think doing that in any capacity is healthy and good, and helps other aspects of your life and maybe other aspects of your creativity. And that's what I'm doing. That's why I do it. I'm trying to like holistically approach, I guess, creativity, right?
Yeah, like I feel like a podcast is low stakes enough that
Mm-hmm.
uh, it's like the way we've treated it is like we're recording a conversation that we'd have anyway, and it's low stakes enough, but it's kind of like that spark that kind of it's enough of a creative outlet conversation that then you can like parlay that into, for you it's working on your art, drawing and animation stuff. For me, I'm getting back into both writing and game design again. Um, I do when we have these conversations. I almost always I don't edit the podcast because I finally like, yeah, I'm going to put an hour or two into my game that I'm working on. I need to be editing the podcast, but I'm actually working on my creative projects. Um, and even that process of editing, like I feel like I get into a flow state really well when I do finally sit down to start editing something. So it's like podcasts are these. I've done enough of these now that it's like I know there's like a growing negative connotation that podcast and podcast bros in particular kind of have with it, but I feel like it is, it's like externalizing a conversation that you would have with friends, and then we're hoping to parlay that into community building anyways. So that's what I really like about this project.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Likewise, I agree. I think the
Um,
community part is really it's central to like our politics, our ethics, and how we think stuff like this should be approached.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm finally at a point in my life where, as much as I told myself I didn't want it, I did want that like parasociality of being the influencer, and I think I finally let that go entirely. That I could focus on the community aspect of it. Um, Maybe could we spend the last couple minutes talking about our current projects that we're working on? It doesn't have to be anything concrete or specific, but here we were talking about jumpstarting our creativity. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yeah,
please.
me first.
Yeah.
For me, it's like I said, game design. I've gotten really interested in game design again. When I was 15, I was playing online games, and there's a person in my guild that I worked with at the time who was making an RPG maker. It's this program that you don't have to learn any coding. You can kind of like put your maps together, and then the coding kind of happens for you on the back end. And if you know how to code, it's good because you can add other features and stuff like that. So I'm not a coder. I've tried to teach myself coding over the years, but for me to like make a game from scratch right now would be basically impossible. But this program allows you to like learn the basics and scripting and events and common events and variables and stuff like that in a low stakes environment. And I've had a bunch of these stories that I wrote when I was a kid in my teenage years that I still have the hard copies of them. And I want to turn one of those into an actual like 5 to 10 hour RPG that I
Oh,
could upload and people could play. And
nice.
that's my number one project right now that I'm working on.
Oh, that would be very cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Um,
I need to know about that when that's complete.
yeah. And
um,
what's really cool is it RP like developing games uh part it goes into like a lot of other different creative you have to make music. So then do you make your own music? And I'm kind of a self-taught musician over the years, so I know the basics enough to like, and that's how it helped me to like even grow in my music abilities. Writing for RPGs is a specific skill, even different from just general writing. So working on that, and then of course learning, more and more about coding and game design in general. Art, I'm not a very good artist. I'll have to farm out the art for sure, but everything else I can kind of teach myself and do. Yeah, so
Oh,
that's me. What about you, Obed? What are you working on right
awesome.
now?
Um, well, lately, I mean, I'm trying to. I would like to make another like complete piece. Um,
Oh, that's right. You mentioned the show. I know about your show,
yeah.
but did you want to tell the audience about your show?
I mean, it wasn't really anything that special. I joined a very small. Well, it wasn't a small show, but it was a local gallery that puts on a yearly show. And it was like a 12 by 12 um show. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go for it. I was getting connected with some of the guys from that gallery, and they encouraged me to submit. And I was like, okay, let's do it. Let's just try. And then I created a piece, submitted it, got in, and yeah, it shown for like about a month at the gallery. Um, and just the experience of doing that was like very encouraging, and convinced me that's like, okay, I can, I'm an artist and I can actually do art and complete a piece, and it can be, people can see it and enjoy whatever. So I would like to do that again, not necessarily for a show or anything, but just like to create more work. Um, I'm also really getting into, uh, and maybe this is helping. I got one of these like planner, like journal planner
Mm-hmm.
kind of things that are very popular to do a lot of. I guess you could call it like scrapbooking, but it's these journals that are very like
Like
it's
mind mapping
almost kind
type
of
of
a
thing?
little. No, it's like an actual physical journal. Um, and it's a little twee, but people are very into like there's so many little accessories you can get, and all these little like uh ways that people share with like, oh, this is how I decorate mine, this is how I use mine, whatever. And I'm really getting into that, and that is also a creative outlet because it's an organizational tool, but it's also like an opportunity to kind of like do little tiny creative um mini projects, because you treat the page as like another opportunity for writing and art together, and I really like combining those things together. So I have been using it every day. I've been writing every day in it for like the past couple of weeks, and it's like, oh, it's helping me rediscover writing as well, because that's another thing that I also like enjoy doing, and it's just another opportunity to practice, to flex the muscle.
Yeah.
um that's something that I've been enjoying, and it's me trying to keep pushing myself to you know do some kind of finished work. So nothing really like major, super focused, but right now I'm trying to get myself used to like doing stuff like every day, like a little bit of something every day to kind of build it up. Because when I did create that piece, I'm proud of it, but it was also a bit of a ordeal to create it because I did have a lot of anxiety around doing it, and it was a bit of a marathon at the end. So it was kind of exhausting. So I would like to be at a place where I can. I don't know if that's ever going to go away, because there's always going to be, but maybe a healthier way, or a way that I can do it more. It's more accessible to me. It's more immediate, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah.
Um,
I think like two things. Like you don't want to burn yourself out. Like if you try to launch full
mhm,
into
mhm,
huge projects when you're still kind of rebuilding that muscle, like you said, then you don't want to burn yourself out. And the other thing that stuck with me a lot is that concept of like doing the reps. I
mhm,
kind of
mhm,
have worked out over the years off and on. And if you take a break, 6 months to a year longer break of working out, you want to go back to the gym and lift the same weight that you were lifting a year ago. And your body's like, no, I can't do that. And so it's the same, like, you can't just go right back into writing your masterpiece. You have to kind of build that daily habit again of writing.
Yeah. Yeah. Because ultimately I'm not trying to like get like I'm not trying to like meet a deadline and like complete a whole thing at the end, you know?
That's I have in my notes for today, I put like, we need to do success, productivity, labor, deadlines, and what they do for me. That's another topic that we could add to that list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
Because the whole productivity thing is like you have to meet deadlines and deliver on what, and your
It's for someone
livelihood.
else.
Yeah, exactly. And so, how do I create deadlines for myself? Might be something worth exploring. Is I need
Yeah,
the
like what's the
deadline.
healthy way to
Yeah, healthy deadlines.
Yeah, because because then it's like about the whole SMART goal thing. Like it has to be time sensitive, whatever. But there's a way of like looking at it differently, right? Like
Right.
there's a way of um what's the relationship to it? Like it doesn't have to be like, oh,
Right.
it has to be by this date. Because what I was trying to do was have you ever had the thing where okay, like let's say you're working with a team to get to prepare, like do event planning, let's say like you're trying to get the event. It's like if you've ever done that, you can see how like crazy things get. And the point is like, okay, we're gonna like burn ourselves out like the weekend of that event,
Yeah.
but the goal is to make it look like everything's fine and nobody's stressed out and everything's wonderful at the end. And in behind the scenes it's like oh, we got it to the finish line, but we like went crazy the last few days to
Right.
get there, right? It's
Right.
like I don't want to do that for every piece.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're
Like, I
saying.
feel like it should be a better like because that's kind of how it felt when I created that piece. It was like, oh my god, because I don't do that regularly anymore. So it's like trying to have like a healthier, more sustainable, more like I don't know, like just a better way of doing that because if I was in better practice, I would have been able to kind of handle that a little differently. So,
Yeah, that's a good analogy too, because I've organized events where, we started a year prior. We had monthly check-ins with all of the stakeholders, and when it came time to actually, execute the event, we had been so prepared that it actually went off pretty well, and we didn't have to burn
mhm.
ourselves doing it. And then I've had other events where it was a crap show the entire time until finally everything
The
came together at the last
scramble.
moment, scrambled to get it done.
Yeah.
Um, that's a good analogy because the same thing where it's like my master's degree. I wrote my master's thesis in 2 weekends, and it was like basically one whole Saturday and two partial
God.
Sundays, and it took me a long time to recover from those writing sessions of working on that. So there's a way of building the habit where you can scramble and get something done if you have to like meet a deadline, like your show, like you had to get that piece ready to go, or you can do it in a healthy way where you're just like, I would have been doing this no matter what. Had it not been for a deadline, had it been for a deadline, I would have
Yeah.
been working on this no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's a good intro to who we are. I think you and I are both kind of open books if people ask the right questions. So, uh,
Oh yeah.
yeah, I'm happy to talk more about my background, my creative process, and I'm sure we're going to continue to explore that in this project. I've heard some good feedback. I have a couple of friends that I shared this with, and they've given me kind of the same feedback of, things that you and I had noticed that we could do better, but also just they like the
Mm-hmm.
whole concept of community building for creation and
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
that parasociality. So,
Definitely.
yeah.
That's good to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know
Lovely.
we've got some interviews lined up. We're hoping to start including some other people and hearing from them and their process. And I'm excited.
Me too.
Yeah. Do you have any last things you wanted to share? Anything that came to mind? What would you feel complete if you made sure you shared this morning?
No, just that just really happy to be doing this project and sharing it with folks. And I hope that this kind of gives a better idea to why we're doing it, who we are, and why, like, why this and why us for this, you know?
Yeah, we're asking people to give us some of their time, so we're trying to deliver as good as we can.
Great.
Yeah, well, cool. Well, you said thank you. You said earlier I had a nice voice, and I'm like, well, that's coming from the man with the baritone, so don't even give me that. I got this nasally, high pitched over here, and you're like, hi, my name is Obed.
No.
So I'm gonna. Anyways, my point is I'm gonna make you sign us off because you have the really
Oh my
nice
gosh.
baritone.
All right. Well, that was our episode this week. Thanks so much for joining us. And you can find our socials below in the little, what do they call it? Doobly-doo?
Doobly-doo.
They still say that?
I have no clue. The box below, the description, video description.
There you go. Yeah. So, yeah, you can find all our socials below. So please connect with us. And thanks so much for listening. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for taking this journey with us. How are you creatively expressing yourself this week? We're gathering a community of creatives, so join us in our Discord or connect with us on social media. You can find all of the links below.